All right, well, let's get started. Thank you all for attending. I'm Michelle McGurl. I am the program lead for the CTR programs, as well as now the acting director for the Division for Research Capacity Building, which manages the IDEA program on behalf of the rest of the NIH. So just a reminder that this is being recorded, and we will post that on the CTR website afterwards. So if you don't want to be recorded, then it's time to go. And if not, please stay on. We will also make the slides available on the CTR website shortly after the webinar, probably up by Monday or Tuesday, just in case you want to refer to them as you're preparing applications. I want to thank the staff who have helped me, particularly Tony Bauman and Shane Roberts, who are helping with the tech part of this, and also let you know that you will be hearing from Fed Bernal, who's the acting branch chief for the Research Advancements Programs, which manages CTRs, Sarah Siratham from SRO, who's our scientific review officer, and she'll be able to answer any questions about review at the end. And also Christy Leek, our senior grants management specialist, who knows anything and everything related to IDEA programs, budgets, and what you can and can't do. And we will be asking you to type in your questions into the chat window. You don't have to wait until the webinar is done. You can put them in at any time, and Fed will moderate that to give me a bit of a break in talking, hopefully. So this will be a rather lengthy seminar compared to most of ours, because there's a lot to cover. This is a new program. So with that, we'll get going. So just a little bit about the IDEA program itself. You know, NIGMS administers this on behalf of the whole NIH, and the program is really limited to supporting organizations in 23 states and Puerto Rico. So if you're at an institution and you're not from one of the states that are shown in green, this is not your webinar, and you won't be able to apply. Assuming you're in one of those green states, the shaded green ones, then you may be familiar with the IDEA program. It has 5 components. COBREs, which are really about supporting faculty level research development in a very specific scientific area at a single institution. The institution picks that scientific area and submits a COBRE award. Also supports INBREs, which grow research culture through support for a statewide network. And that hopefully connects faculty and students at primarily undergraduate institutions and community colleges with the more research intensive universities in the state. And IDEA can also help if you have an R01 or an R15, that is close to the pay line at NEIC, but isn't quite going to get funded. Sometimes co-funding can help that IC make the decision to fund your award. The newest program is IRED, which supports entrepreneurship in any one of the 4 IDEA regions. But today we're going to focus on the IDEA CTR program, where CTR stands for Clinical and Translational Research. And you'll see clinical and translational abbreviated as C&T throughout this talk. So this program began about 11 years ago, and it's intended to build the capacity for clinical, behavioral, and translational research by supporting clinical and translational workforce development, infrastructure enhancement, and research in the form of pilot programs. And that's, in fact, the goals of the IDEA CTR program. Now, this happens in any area of the NIH mission, so we're not limited to just the basic research. That is what most of NIGMS does. But basically, if NIH funds it, it's a fair game area for research in the IDEA program. So now we're taking this IDEA CTR program, and we've made some changes. We've actually split it into 2 programs. The goals are the same. Okay, so nothing has really changed. It's just that we're trying to open it up and serve IDEA states that may need different things. So the current program, the IDEA CTR program, has been rebranded as the CTR Network CTR-N Award. And it continues to support statewide or multi-state networks in states that have already significant levels of clinical and translational research. The new Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO, as they're now called here at NIH, this emphasizes what we found to be the prior successes of its grantees in conducting research that uses large clinical data sets like electronic health records, EHR, or in doing collaborative research involving more than one CTR program. But what we found was that the success of the current cadre of IDEA CTRs really broadened the gap between states that were leading CTRs and those that didn't. And so to address that, we're now offering a second program called the CTR-D for Development Award. And this CTR-D is really intended to fill two different and distinct purposes. One is to build foundational strength for clinical and translational research where capacity is really limited and there's not a lot going on. Maybe there's no med school to really catalyze some of that. And also, though, to assist organizations that have already built up a good amount of capacity for clinical and translational research, but can't support a statewide network. And I'll expand on why they can't and what the limitations are a little bit later on. So there are two NOFOs out, distinct for these two types of awards. So the CTR application due dates are both at the same time. CTR-D and CTR-N are both due this year on November 9th. And then after that, it will be annually on October 9th for these 3 years of support. The review occurs in March, council is in May, and the earliest start date for these awards would be July of 2024 for this year and 2025-26 afterwards. So we really appreciate our colleagues from Scientific Review Branch in helping us accommodate this late due date. And that was because we took a while to get this NOFO approved and get them out on the street so that you would at least still have 2 months to prepare an application. I know that still feels rushed, but it was the best we could do. We wanted to make sure you had the opportunity to apply this current coming year. So for CTR-N applications, you're allowed to submit new applications. In future years, obviously, it's okay to put in a resubmission, an A1 application. It will be allowed the following year if you're not successful. But also for the CTR-N, active IDEA CTRs are really encouraged to come in with a renewal application. But on the other hand, if they have their network partnerships have really changed a lot, they may want to consider coming in as a new application, and both are fine, both are acceptable. For the CTR-D applications, new applications are expected for this round. Of course, obviously, unsuccessful applicants can come back in with resubmissions, and we don't allow renewals yet because this is only a 3-year award, a 3-year NOFO, and the successful applicants will only be able to come in for a renewal after 4 or 5 years. So it's not allowed for this one, but we do anticipate allowing people to submit renewals of CTR-Ds in the future. So there shouldn't be any panic just because it's not on this current NOFO. About the budget. So you can see there's a big difference in the two budgets, 3.3 million versus 1.5 million. And that's because of the different scopes and the number of organizations that will be involved in the CTR-N versus the CTR-D. Also, both of these are regular Program P project grants rather than the older IDEA CTR, which was a U54 mechanism. And the U indicates that substantial programmatic involvement was anticipated. We found that that really wasn't very necessary. Program officers are available to answer questions anyway, so we've removed that that kind of cooperative part of the NOFO and just made these regular Ps. Also, compared with the IDEA CTR program, we switched to a direct cost model rather than a total cost model. So this aligns better with current NIH practice. And so it was time to make that change, and we've done that. Okay, The big question for many of you watching, I assume, is which award do I apply for? So here's some guidance about that. We expect a lot from CTR-N awardees, and so they need to have a fair amount of resources already in place. By that, I mean personnel, expertise, infrastructure. And so partners, they also have to have partners, and they have to select those partners based on the partner's ability and the desire to be involved in clinical research. And usually the typical CTR-N network, it includes universities, med schools, healthcare organizations, whatever you got within the state, okay? There's also typically a very strong cadre of clinical researchers at the lead institution and across the network. Even if, you know, partner to partner varies a bit, all of them need to be committed to expanding their clinical and translational research workforce. There's also typically a fair number of clinicians available to do research, MDs, RNs, clinical psychologists, physical therapists, you name it, people who are licensed to do clinical, are licensed clinicians who also want to and do conduct research. That's important because those are the people who are going to act as mentors to others who want to add research to their careers. And importantly, of course, there's existing infrastructure and personnel to help investigators do their work. So if your organization or collection of organizations has all of these traits, the CTR-N is probably right for you. What about the CTR-D? Now, importantly, this is not a network award. Instead, it's very focused on growing capacity at a single individual institution or a couple of institutions that are really poised, prepared to work collaboratively. There are many idea states that don't have a med school, okay? And others have med schools that have not really been heavily focused on research. And these do have a great need to develop critical mass and infrastructure for doing clinical and translational research and to grow their research base. In the past, organizations in these states were kind of partnered up with other IDEA CTR programs led by other states. But we found that that model wasn't very effective because funding was spread very thinly and the large networks are harder to manage. And also the partner institutions in this case were benefiting primarily from pilot support and perhaps not developing their own infrastructure. So this is a reason why we created the CTR-D. But there's also another target audience for CTR-D. In some states, there's more than one research active medical school, for example, and often one of them can have a CTSA Clinical and Translational Science Award, Hub Award, from another NIH institute called NCATS. And there are more than 60 CTSA hubs that are active across the US. And they include institutions like Johns Hopkins and Harvard Medical. And so there are a few idea state institutions, University of New Mexico Health Science Center, Medical University of South Carolina, University of Kentucky, KUMC, University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences, that have CTSA Hub Awards. Now, for obvious reasons, an organization with a CTSA hub does not need a CTR award to help build its capacity. These are really leaders in clinical and translational research. And so they can't be a part of a CTR network, but they are a major place where clinical and translational research occurs. So because the CTSA hub means that they can't be a part of a CTR network, you can't form a statewide network in those states that have CTR awards. So therefore, CTR-N can't be created in that state. And because the CTSA hub is not a network award, it's an individual institutional award that sometimes has partners. Other organizations in that state may not have access to the resources. And we found that that's true in idea states. So we wanted to also help other institutions in those states build their clinical and translational research capacity, even if they can't form a network. So even if they have a lot going on and they're pretty active in the clinical and translational research space, we still want to help them grow. And so this CTR-D award is also for those organizations. Importantly, partners are allowed, so it's okay to partner up with someone, but it's not required. You have to look around and see what fits naturally, where you have connections, and where those connections are going to grow clinical research. So with the mission of these two CTR programs in mind, I want to talk a bit about eligibility. Now, when we were defining these, we kept some key principles in mind, and I find it's always helpful for me to explain to potential applicants what the thought process was at NIGMS, so that you're not all reading the NOFO and saying, what were they thinking? Now you know what we're thinking. Okay. So one of the key principles we kept in mind was that we always need to be good stewards of taxpayer money, and we want to maximize the impact of every idea dollar. So to do that, we also will make awards that funding that make sure it reaches all idea states. And of course, to do that also, we were going to make sure that there's only one type of CTR award, whether that's an idea CTR, that's already existing, a new CTR-N or a new CTR-D award per state. Also, that means that an institution can only participate in one of these awards. So it's time to have to really choose what kind of award you think is right for you and what one you want to try to get for your state, for your institution, and then and go from there. We want to make sure that we don't duplicate resources offered through CTSA hubs also, and to allow organizations to define their own capacity building under their own terms. And so that's why an institution can lead or can be a leader partner in a CTR award or a CTSA award, but not both. CTSA hub awards have very specific requirements about needing to serve the mission of the CTSA. All partners are required to do that. And that can be at odds with the CTR program. So you have to choose which one you're going to be involved with and affiliated with. So we also envision that there may be some idea CTR programs that are currently active that might wish to downsize a bit and focus on building up more of their foundations. And so it's okay if a lead institution of a current idea CTR elects to submit a CTR-D award instead of a CTR-N. And of course, as a CTR-D develops and builds its own capacity in the future, it can also apply to become a statewide network as long as it's eligible to do so. And that we would welcome, of course, in the next cycle or two after foundations have been established. So with that, we're going to talk specifically about CTR-N and CTR-D eligibility. So for CTR-Ns and CTR-Ds, eligibility is determined at the time of submission. That's kind of something we've instituted across the IDEA programs. So for CTR-Ns, the lead institution must have externally funded clinical and translational research grants. The leads and partners also have to be exclusive to the proposed CTR network. So they can't be the leader partner of another CTR or CTSA hub. And of course, partners are required or it wouldn't be a network, right? So the number of partners, though, can vary. It depends on what your state looks like. And an active IDEA CTR is expected to come in as a renewal. But if the network's partners have changed a lot, then as I said, it's also possible and perhaps even preferred to submit as a new application. So in those cases, the PI can still describe prior success in explaining how the IDEA CTR funding helped it to build up its existing infrastructure and workforce. But then again, you have to also remember to avoid all references to this being a renewal. So read the instructions carefully. And when it says for renewals, do X, Y, Z, don't do those if you're coming in as a new award. In general, I suggest that you don't leave reviewers wondering. So the application really should succinctly explain why a network composition has changed and why a CTR-N is coming in as a new application instead of a renewal. That's fine to do, but reviewers like to know what's in your head. Okay, the CTR-D eligibility is not much different, although partners are definitely not required here. If a leader or partner was a part of an active IDEA CTR or a CTR-ND or a hub, a CTSA hub, then we're going to ask for evidence that the relationship has been formally relinquished on or before the date of submission. And you have to include that in the application under letters of support. I suggest you include a copy of the letter that you have sent to the current CTR or CTSA lead, and put that in as a letter of support. And yes, this does mean that organizations need to plan carefully and think about whether to remain a partner on another award or to venture out on their own. But ultimately, we feel that this will benefit everyone and strengthen clinical and translational research in IDEA states. A reminder here that when we say active awards, we always mean active awards, including ones that are currently funded, as well as those that are in a no-cost extension. So there's one or two other nuances that I think we should cover, because these are things that can jeopardize an application making it to review. First, the due dates are the same for these two NOFOs. You can submit to one or the other, but not to both. As you'll see, as we discuss the details of these NOFOs, the applications are very similar. Certainly their goals are the same, and the structure is very similar as well. So they would be considered as highly overlapping. And of course, NIH rules say you can't submit have two highly overlapping applications submitted for review at the same time, okay? And in keeping with the goals of serving a state or a region's entire population, as opposed to being very specifically defined narrow disease focus or a population focus, we won't accept those kinds of applications. So it is considered non-responsive if your application proposes to focus on a narrow disease or a very specific subpopulation of your area. And I suggest for those who want to do that, because it's really important to have those kinds of grants as well, that you consider applying to the IDEA COBRI program instead, because COBRI can support that. Okay, what about the PI, the PDPI person? This person's expected to be an established clinical investigator who has experience also in leading and managing a large program and working across units of your institution, across different organizations, to really, someone who knows how to get things done and break down silos is really what you want to find for a leader. There can be two PIs who share responsibility, and that is the maximum allowed for a multi-PI grant for this particular case, for this application. There is a requirement of a 3-month minimal annual commitment level of effort per PDPI, and only 6 months collective are allowed. So that's why you can have a maximum of 2. It's simple math on that. One thing I really want to stress here to potential PIs about these programs is that it's a tremendous undertaking, and it's a service to your organization and your state. And PIs of IDEA programs have often said to program officers, if I only knew this at the beginning, I would have asked for more resources from my institution to help the program succeed, or even to sustain my own research program. And so I'm passing along this advice to you from other former PIs to give you a little food for thought about bringing your administrators on board so that you can get the institutional commitments up front that you'll need to be successful, because that's the time to negotiate, right? We all know that. And this is very important for you because as a PI, your research program cannot benefit from the CTR grant. This is strictly enforced by NIGMS. So you can't receive research funding, just administrative funding is okay, but no research funding for a pilot, for a research project, or even a supplement project. But you're not alone in this. There are 3 committees that can help you assist in the management. The first is a steering committee, and the steering committee includes a senior official from every lead or partner organization, And it's required even if for a CTR-D that only has a lead and doesn't have any partners. The goal here is to make sure that the initial commitments you get from the organizations are honored, and that senior officials are also kept apprised of the challenges and the successes of a CTR award. And so this is a great way to do it. The steering committee meets and you have an automatic connection to those people as the PI. The executive committee is much more hands-on and should meet regularly to discuss the CTR's management and operations. This is really the nuts and bolts of how a CTR works. And finally, there should be a committee of external advisors who are appointed to provide an independent assessment of the CTR, how well it's working. They can suggest improvements and use their experience and expertise to suggest course corrections if any are needed. Now, that application shouldn't identify any of the external advisor committee people by name, unless it happens to be a renewal application and somebody is continuing in that role from the prior award. Instead, you want to describe the kinds of advisors you will seek, their expertise and their experience. And it's really to your advantage to do this, because if you start naming all the people you think you might want to invite, you could be eliminating some of your best reviewers. So it's a good idea to follow those instructions and don't name anybody who's a potential advisory committee, and don't contact anyone until an award is made. So more about the nuts and bolts, the CTR organization. Both CTR-N and CTR-D have 5 required cores. It's very similar to, but not quite the same as the older IDEA CTR program. So there's an administrative core that manages it all, and it works with the committees that I just described. It has administrative staff to keep things running smoothly. And it helps manage the other 4 cores that are required. And we'll go over what these are in detail, but I just want to also point out that CTR-Ns, but not CTR-Ds, have the ability to add other cores if they find they're necessary and can't fit under one of the required cores. At this stage, I should probably mention that there used to be a tracking and evaluation core, but those duties, they still exist, but they've been moved into the admin core rather than being a separate core. So CTRs, both D and N, are expected to either form or to strengthen existing connections with community clinics. And those are not required to be partner organizations, although you may find that 1 or 2 end up to be your partners as the collaborations grow. And now, of course, I'm bouncing back and forth. Sorry about that. There we go. Let's start going through the cores ever so briefly here. So the administrative core is responsible for the administration of the award, right? As it's described in the overall plan, which is the overall component is a requirement of the application itself. It handles all the coordination and integration of everything that's part of the CTR, the different organizations, the cores, and the committees. It also handles all the budgets and the money and make sure everything gets reported and distributed properly. It handles subcontracts if there are any. And it manages annual evaluation process. Now for a CTR-D, it also will manage recruitment of additional faculty, staff, or clinical fellows, and the establishment of necessary infrastructure. The professional development core. One thing I noticed in the IDEA CTR program is that there was a lot of crosstalk among cores, which is a good thing. We want them to be integrated, but they all have separate missions. So we've tried very hard here to make the missions of each of the cores very distinct. And hopefully that will be respected in the applications and in the administration of the awards. So the professional development core here oversees the workforce development of investigators as well as the core's professional staff. That ensures that training that is needed is provided. And so one example is that the professional development core will work with another core that manages federal and institutional policies on research involving human subjects, vertebrate animals, or biohazards. Now, it's the PD Corps' job to make sure those trainings occur and to manage them, but they have to work hand in hand with the Corps that administers those to make sure that the right people get the training that they need. It also will organize and sponsor professional development activities that you may be more used to thinking about, like research seminar series, grant writing workshops, skills training, and providing some mentoring guidance to those people who serve as mentors. And for CTR-D, it's important that this collaborates, that the PD Corps collaborates with other corps, because this is where you will see the assessment when additional expertise is needed for hiring. So it's the PD Corps that works and identifies those and reports back to the admin corps about what's needed. So the CEO Corps, Community Engagement and Outreach. This is the group that leads the engagement of with community groups and state organizations. It identifies the health research needs and challenges of the population that is being served, and it develops investigator and staff skills to prepare them for community outreach. It needs to foster cultural respect and knowledge so that it's appropriate to the community it's working with, and also offer strategies to increase the recruitment and retention of diverse populations in clinical research. That's just so important these days, because research that omits populations is often found to be faulty later on. So it's important to be inclusive here. The CEO Corps also really importantly has to stress multi-directional engagement among the researchers and the community groups. And it will engage the clinical staff and patients from those community clinics to kind of foster a research culture among them and get some buy-in that way. Now the mouthful one, the RDCD Corps, Research Design, Compliance, and Data Management Corps. This used to be known as the BIRD Corps, but its scope has been a bit expanded here, so I'll take some time to explain this. This is the Corps that provides the expertise to investigators as they're designing their research protocols, especially when it comes to human subjects in clinical trials. It's really important that any research that people do has thought about risk assessment, safety, intervention models, picking the right one, making sure that there's enough statistical power so that the research that gets done is rigorous and worthwhile, and that can form the basis for really concrete conclusions from the work. It also needs to avoid any kind of it can help investigators avoid any methodological bias. I think that's called, it's time for a drink of water here. So it provides guidance on human subjects research and clinical trials, including all of the regulatory parts that are required. And it will manage electronic health records, EHR, and other clinical data sets to make them accessible to investigators to do research. And that includes a lot of management of policies and agreements and a lot of red tape, but it's important that it gets done properly. And this is part of what the RDCD Corps does. It also provides data analytics and biostatistical analysis help to investigators. Now in CTR-D, for groups that are a little bit nascent in their research endeavors here, it's okay if you want to phase in the RDCD Corps as your research capacity is developed. So if that makes sense for you, you can propose that. Just explain clearly what you're doing and provide a timeline. The Health Research Corps is where all of the pilot and research actually gets done. This needs to be led by someone who understands clinical research, and it manages all CTR-supported research. So some IDEA CTRs in the past had put pilots under different corps, and we don't want to do that anymore. There's one corps to manage all of this. It figures out how to solicit applications, what kinds of science it wants to target, if it has a couple of areas it wants to grow, for example, using informatics or looking at team science, whatever it might be, whatever the approach is. It needs to manage soliciting those applications from investigators in all lead and partner institutions. It has to arrange for their review and selection of meritorious applications that it will then submit to the NIH for approval. And that is important. No science actually gets put in the application itself here in the parent award. All of that is done afterwards. So you want to describe your processes for this and your goals for the research that the HR core is going to support, but you don't include any actual projects in it. That comes later after the award's been made. So the pilot projects are one-year feasibility studies intended for either independent investigators or clinician fellows who will work with a research mentor. And the idea behind this is that you're going to test ideas that could become future NIH-K awards, career development awards, or even small developmental research grants from either NIH or another, foundation source. The budget for these, a minimum of $50,000 and a maximum of $100,000 direct costs per year for every pilot. There's also the opportunity to fund developmental projects. These are 2-year projects for independent investigators only. And the idea here is you want to you have an idea that you want to develop into potentially an R01 equivalent research project, but you need more data to do that. And this is a maximum budget of $100,000 direct costs per year per project. Now for CTR-Ds, again, you do have the option to phase in the HR core as capacity is developed. You may need to hire some people to help them develop applications first. And that's appropriate. Again, just add a timeline and explain why you're doing and what your goals are. For CTR-Ns only, not CTR-Ds, we want to also have multi-site collaborative projects. So these are either network-wide within the CTR-N or collaborations with other CTR-Ns or other idea institutions, CTSAs, whatever you want to, as long as it's in an idea state, you can collaborate. And the maximum budget for these is $400,000 direct costs per year. Now we expect that a CTR-N will participate in one of these, at least one collaborative project during the 5-year funding period, assuming it's 5 years. You can ask for less, but most people don't. Okay. And the goal here is really that we saw the progress that idea CTRs were making in collaborative research, and we want to encourage that and see more of it. So we also think a good idea to phase your approach, right? So provide some, in the first year, provide some early funding to meet specific benchmarks. Making sure that you have the right software to cover the kinds of research information you're going to be collecting from participants. You might have to recruit site PIs, managing subcontracts, data use and data transfer agreements, and getting all of the institutional specific and federal requirements, including IRB approval, takes time. And so you can plan something out and phase in and use some money in the beginning to get that going. And then once you figure out what all your costs are and how everything's working, you can begin to recruit, and then more funding can be released to do the actual study itself and complete it. And again, we hope CTRs, we want to see every CTR-N do one of these in the 5-year period. So again, I mentioned that CTR-Ns are allowed to submit additional cores. These should be technology or service cores that can't provide, that can't be covered under the required cores. And some examples that have come up in the past have been things like biospecimen collection, repository, or even clinical resources, providing access to registries that exist of current potential research participants, so that it makes the research being done in the HR core easier to manage. So how do you prepare a CTR application? Well, there is the overall plan, and this is where you want to talk about the overall vision of what the CTR is going to do and any roles of the lead and any partner organizations. You also should discuss the current clinical and translational research and investigator base, so people know what you're starting with, reviewers understand where you are, and then you should talk about where you hope to be. The organizational structure needs to be explained, as well as any plans that you have to integrate all of the various components and the moving parts of this CTR application. For renewals for the CTR-N, you should also provide information on the progress and accomplishments from the current IDEA CTR funding period. It's also required for both CTR-Ns and CTR-Ds that the overall plan includes letters of support from each lead and partner organization. These need to demonstrate the institutional commitment to the program itself, and that can include commitment of very specific resources, like maybe hiring new investigators, providing clinical or core support staff, or investing in infrastructure. But I want to point out that commitments to specific cores or other components should be summarized in a table so that it doesn't get overwhelming for reviewers. You may have noticed a little green box on the one picture I had with the circles and showing you the layout of the organization, called PEDP. This is a plan for enhancing diverse perspectives, and it is a requirement. So if it's not an attachment in the overall component, your application will not get reviewed. So make sure you have this. This PEDP is required because NIH has really seen that strength comes from when you have a very diverse workforce, and it fosters innovation and competitiveness, and improves the research quality, and it advances the participation of underserved populations. And that includes, rural Americans who are, not included in a lot of studies, right? So the PEDP should describe how you want to expand inclusivity for your CTR program, and how that will help advance the scientific and technical merit of your proposed structure, and how it aligns with the research strategy. Now, the NOFOs give examples of what PEDP activities might do that. Those are provided, but they are standardized language developed for all types of funding mechanisms. And so your PEDP can use some of those if they align. It can come up with its own, but whatever you propose really has to align with the overall CTR goals. And the PEDP does get evaluated by reviewers as part of the scorable review criteria. So even though it's a one-page attachment, you should spend some time on this, because reviewers look at this carefully and they evaluate it. Okay, now the administrative core budget, I want to give a little talk about. It covers funds for leadership and administrative salaries. It covers the expenses related to having an external advisory committee come out and visit and provide advice. It also can compensate those senior officials who are part of the executive committee, members who are doing a lot of work and are part of the executive committee. It can compensate them for their time. For CTR-D, this is where, again, it will cover recruitment of additional faculty, staff, or clinical fellows, and that can cover up to $200,000 a year, and it can go towards salary, supplies, or equipment. One thing IDEA funds can't be used for is for collaborators in non-IDEA states or at foreign sites. So don't propose a clinical research project that includes collaborations or foreign sites or non-IDEA sites. That we can't fund. But we can use money in the US or at foreign sites as fee-for-service activities. So for example, if you have an investigator who needs to go learn a new technique, or send samples out for analysis, or attend a workshop, that's okay. Same as for travel, right? For a pilot and a project and lead. It's okay to travel and provide travel funds for those things. It's also all right to cover any costs related to PEDP implementation. The total budget of these awards are set. So you spend the money as you see fit, and you don't have to give line item details to the nth degree for those kinds of PEDP. If it's a small amount, that can just be part of the admin budget itself. Now, what about core budgets? Certainly it covers funds for the salary of the core lead who has to put in a month of annual effort, 1 month per year. It covers core staff personnel costs and the costs of all of its related activities. It can include funds to hire consultants if they're needed, and also to acquire or modernize equipment. Although CTRs tend to not be very equipment heavy grants compared to, say, a COBRE, there is some things that you need and you can ask for it. Now for the RDCD core, you can also request funds to help you manage all of that clinical data set, the EHR or medical images that you plan to use and maintain. But you can't use funds to buy access to commercially available EHR. That's not allowed, just to manage your own. For the HR core, make sure that you only include a placeholder budget for the research projects. Don't submit any actual projects itself or include any very specifics of the details of any research project. So how does the review work here? Well, in the first step, your application comes in, it comes to NIGMS, and both the program officers at DRCB and our scientific review officers do their jobs and they review it. They are looking for applications to make sure they're eligible, to make sure they're compliant and responsive. And if not, they get withdrawn. So please read and follow the NOFO instructions. It's also a good idea to apply a few days in advance, and so that you can actually see what your application is going to look like to the people who are going to review it. And then it gives you time to fix it and resubmit if you need to. Some of the common issues that cause people to be administratively withdrawn cause that issue are missing attachments, like the PEDP or the newly required data management sharing plan. Maybe if you've proposed a narrow disease focus or you have an ineligible leader partner, all of those things will be checked, and your application, if it has any of those issues, will not be allowed to go to review. So please think carefully about what the parts are and how to make your application, survive that to get to the next step, which is the scientific review. Here, the applications are divided among special emphasis panels, and the numbers just depend on the number of applications. There are reviewer orientation meetings that both POs and scientific review officers attend, and we give the same material to all reviewers, whether or not they're in one SEP special emphasis panel or another. For reviewer assignments, obviously, as long as none of them are in conflict, they take care of that. Our SRO colleagues are great. But they'll assign at least 3 reviewers, probably more, to each application. And that's because each application has multiple components. So the overall component gets 3 primary reviewers, and each of the other components, the cores, for example, will get at least 2 reviewers assigned to it. And the process is that the assigned reviewers comment on each of the components, and then there's a discussion among everyone about the overall application. And then finally, all of the panel members vote on the overall application itself, but they don't vote on individual components. So here's some advice from our colleagues. Read the NOFO carefully, as I've already said, and read the review criteria especially, because the critique templates that reviewers get contain the exact same questions as they're asking in the NOFO. Don't duplicate letters of support. Avoid including them if they don't add any substance, and also be aware that this limits the pool of reviewers. If someone's put in a letter of support, they can't be a reviewer. And when you have so many letters of support, reviewers tend to get annoyed and they tend not to read any of them because it's just overwhelming for them. So keep that in mind. It's a good idea to list the names of the people who are submitting letters at the start of each component, and to include the component and core title at the beginning of each summary, so that reviewers can see them and make sure that they have the right expertise to review. They don't have access to the full applications in the recruitment phase when we're trying to find and identify reviewers, only the summaries. So it's really important that those component summaries include some good information to help reviewers know if they're right and can accept an application and do a good job with it. And also feel free to use the PHS assignment form to indicate what expertise is needed. Don't suggest reviewer names here because it's a potential bias, but it's okay to provide names of people you don't think should review your application. And now, finally, funding restrictions for IDEA programs. The PDPI cannot use IDEA funds to support research activities in their lab, and this includes supplements. So this is very important. The PDPI is also not going to be eligible for research project support from either this award, another CTR award from a neighboring state, say, or a COBRI or INBRI. So when you are the PDPI of an IDEA-funded CTR, INBRI, or COBRI, you're really doing a service, and you and your research team can't really benefit from the activities and the research that's going on in the state. So keep that in mind. For the Health Research Corps project leaders, it's important to remember that they can't receive simultaneous research support as project leads from this award or another parent IDEA award. But they might be eligible to lead IDEA projects that are funded by supplements. Usually those we release NOSIs for, notices of special interest. And in that case, we state very clearly whether current project leaders of IDEA awards are eligible to also lead the supplement. So just read the NOSI carefully. It's important to remember that although clinician fellows are eligible to lead pilot projects, postdoc scholars and others that hold non-independent positions cannot lead pilots. So we feel it's really important to encourage clinicians to do research, but there are many other ways that postdoctoral scholars, PhD scholars who don't hold clinical licenses can be supported, and that's not what the intention is here. And with that, I'm going to take a breather and let Fed start answering questions that you've put into the chat. Thank you all so much for paying attention. I apologize, my voice is a little raspy. I'm not in the best of health today, so thanks for bearing with me.
All right. Yes. So, so as Michelle said, feel free to start putting questions on that you may have on the chat. There are actually a couple of questions that came up prior to that through the feedback loop post that was made a few days ago announcing the webinar. So the first question that came up is, would it be advisable to include a short description of pilot projects in the HR core? In the announcement, it mentions all recipient selected projects require prior approval by NIH prior to initiation. However, it does not talk about this with respect to the actual application. It sounds though this is a set aside, which is reasonable. However, we think it would help the reviewers to get a sense about the kind of projects that we are anticipating.
So the answer is yes, you can describe the types of projects, but it should be in the vein of what are the research needs and the health concerns of the population you're serving. Be careful not to be too targeted to say, oh, we're going to just do all of this on diabetes, because that's a narrow focus. So you have to avoid that. On the other hand, giving them an idea of the, kind of the breakdown, if you want to do so many pilots and so many developmental projects, getting them to understand your pipeline for moving people from, nascent researchers into, eventually independently funded researchers is a good idea. So you can provide some descriptions about how you want to run that, but I would be very careful to avoid very specific fields, be a little more broader. I mean, informatics covers anything and everything, right? If you do it right, as opposed to being just if you want to focus on only, artificial intelligence, that might be a little too narrow. So keep that in mind, but yes, you can describe it to reviewers. Mostly you're going to want to be describing how you plan to solicit them, how you're going to review them. All of that's important.
All right. The second question that came up was slightly addressed also during the presentation is the research design, compliance, and data management core equivalent to the BIRD core, the previous BIRD core, the biostatistics, epidemiology, and research design core?
Yes, it is. It's reworked a bit, but it is the equivalent. And so there are going to be parallels. So if you already have a BIRD core, that's what you should transition and become your RDCD core. And in NIH, we have a term called RCDC, so it's really hard for me to get that acronym right. So go ahead.
All right. The next question says, we had a question about core director eligibility. If someone is a PI on a COBRI, are they eligible to serve as a core director on a CTR-D?
They're eligible to serve as a core director on any idea, on any other idea program, yes.
All right, the next
one. They can't
one.
be the CDPI, but they can be core
Yes. Is there a minimum number of pilots or developmental projects per project period?
No, that's up to you. And for CTR-Ds, what would be important would be to think about where you are now and how quickly you can get a pilot program up and running, right? So, so you may start off with just a couple and graduate later on, or you may be an institution that already has a lot going on and you're ready to hit the ground running. So work on that as you think it would help you the most and customize it to your needs.
Okay, the next question. Can multi-site projects be led by R01 funded investigators?
Yes, as long as there's no scientific overlap, sure. That would be great.
All right, the next one here. Each CTR-N should participate in a network study. Does that mean that the CTR should be the coordinating center, or can the CTR be a participating CTR in a trial led by another one, by another CTR?
Yeah, the answer is yes. What we want to do is foster collaboration, so either one is acceptable. You know, it'd be nice if each one of them could lead that, but ultimately, budget-wise, it may not be feasible. So yeah, you can participate in one by providing being a site. But you're funding it with your money, right? That's the goal, right? Is so that the collaboration isn't reliant solely on a single CTR-N.
Okay, the next one. The RDCD core is responsible for human subjects and clinical trials compliance. The HR core is responsible for pilot project applications. Who should handle pilot project applications in the human subject system and assist program? Well,
you know, the admin core needs to do the assist program. Let's face it here, right? But this is why the cores need to work together. The admin core needs to manage a lot of the nuts and bolts of putting things into assist and entering them into the human subject system, making sure clinical trials are registered and keeping up with all of those things. But they have to work with the HR core who's gonna look at those pilots and say, hey, you know, you've got this clinical trial and you're talking about, you know, having you think you're going to get all your primary data collected in 6 months. Well, that might not be so feasible. Why don't you back it up? So they're the advice people, right? As well as working with the RDCD core to provide the protocol assistance you're going to need to develop those projects. So the answer is these cores all need to work together. The HR core manages the projects and makes sure that whoever's being funded, the project leads, have what they need. But that means that they engage with the RDCD core as well. So that's how this should work.
Okay.
It works in my head, as we always said, right? Okay.
Makes sense. Can you pay a consultant as an individual who lives in a non-idea state, just not pay them via an institution?
Consultants are allowed. And how you manage that is a question for Christy Leek.
So thank you. Yes, you can pay a consultant. It just has to comply with your institutional policies. However, your institutional policies cover the payment of consultants is what you should do.
All right, great. Thanks, Christy. The next question, should the proposed network trial be included in the application?
No. All research gets funded as post-award action. So you don't include any specifics. You can talk about things that you've done in the past that might, that are examples of how to do it, but you don't include any specific research trial, research project in the HR core or anywhere in the application. That's all submitted to the NIH after an award is made.
Okay, good. So a slight twist on a previous question, can developmental projects be led by R01 funded investigators?
Yeah, if they have a new idea, why wouldn't you want them to? Especially if they've never done clinical or translational research. If they're making that leap, that would be great. Independent investigators are by definition people who've had funding before, right? They're in independent positions and they're expected to go ahead and do independent research. So sure.
All right. The next question, in regard to the PDPI, what is valued more for the CTR-D application? That the PI has a history of external funding in clinical and translational research, or that the PI has leadership experience? Is one more important than the other? It is hard to find people at our institution that have strong records in both. Usually are stronger in research or leadership, but not both.
Yeah, so for the CTR-D, we recognize that's, that it can be a potential problem. So I think here you want to look at how you're going to manage that. And, do you need to go to a multi-PI arrangement to take advantage of both people's skills? But it's really important that the HR core is managed by someone who has clinical experience. So you can put that person in that role if you want the person who can manage across the institution, break down those silos. If you want that person to be the PI, then you have to push that part of it. In an ideal world, of course, you'll have someone who has both. If you can't make that work either through a multi-PI arrangement or by finding the right person or hiring the right person, then I think it's important that you explain that and show how you're going to manage it. So.
Okay, that was the last question that has come in so far.
Wow, that means either I was very clear or or everyone's very confused, one of the two. So, or I've talked too long. So we'll give it a few more minutes.
Mm-hmm. All right, one more here. In a CTR-D, can resources be given to a community-based hospital?
Yes, to do research or as part of a research project, sure. There's nothing wrong with having that. In fact, we expect that like research, the HR core pilots and research kind of get distributed among partners, right? That it's not all going to one institution. But if the community hospital is just providing, personnel or participants, and they're not really a partner level, then you have to ask, well, what are the roles? They can still be affiliates and they can still have an individual there perhaps who wants to participate in research, and you can help grow your network that way by including them in a pilot. They don't have to be partners for that. So this is where there's a nuance between who's a partner, where you're expected to really commit both to the goals and provide resources, versus people who you're trying to bring in as collaborators and into the network, or even your individual little group if it's a CTR-D. So I hope that helps. So.
All right, we have a few
I'm
more
getting
that
some
came in.
I'm getting some direct messages to me.
Yeah,
so
a lot of these have been coming as direct messages to me as well.
Okay, so maybe you can all, hopefully everyone's seeing them. So there's a question about the DRP budget, right? Is there a minimum amount of effort? So when you look at section 6, I think it is, of the, yes, award administration information. It tells you what you need to do to get approval, and it covers what is expected. So typically someone has like a 1-month effort for these projects. I'm not sure if it's specifically laid out, but that's a general expectation that we have. If it's not in there as a requirement, though, it does not have to happen. They can pay for more time if the dollar amount will allow. There's a maximum budget of $100,000 a year for the developmental projects. The research strategy they have to submit is 6 pages as opposed to the pilot, which is only 3. And here what we're looking for is enough information so we can make sure it's a sound project, and that we can decide what kind of oversight is needed. So when you submit those, the goal for us is that it's already gone through your levels of review, and your EAC has kind of put their rubber stamp on it, and everybody's happy with the projects, right? They come to us, and then we're doing an administrative review to make sure all the regulatory aspects are okay. So I'm looking through to see if there is a minimum requirement. Christy, do you remember if we added one to this? I don't see it. So there might not be a minimal effort required for
I
that.
don't remember. And a lot of times there are not minimum efforts required for pilot projects. It's really, again, keeping in mind what's reasonable for what the person is proposing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I didn't think we had one in that one, but I just wanted to be sure. So.
All right. A few more have come in over here. So see, can the multi-site collaborative project share the budget with another CTR-N?
Yep.
All right.
You have to arrange that. So it's all about networking and talking and collaborating, right?
Mm-hmm. All right. Can a single core have 2 core leaders, particularly if you're merging cores?
Yes, you can have co-directors and co-leads of a core.
Okay. Do HR pilot awardees need to be new investigators or faculty? Can a previous pilot awardee receive a developmental project?
The answer is yes. It is appropriate for anybody who's an independent investigator or a clinician fellow, someone who's got a fellowship and has their MD, but is just now working on additional training. They can apply for pilot projects, and independent investigators can apply for developmental projects. And you could envision a series where you start off with a pilot and then it grows into a developmental project, perhaps. The goal here is to remember that you can only have one type of project funding from any idea grant at any other time, at any given time. So you can't overlap them. You can come back and get another pilot. After you've had one, you have another idea, it's okay to come back and ask for a second pilot later on. Again, we expect the CTRs to manage their portfolio of different kinds of research support so that it maximizes the reach, the investigator reach, the organizational reach, and that good things come out, good outcomes come. So you have to plan around that.
Okay, the next one, if applying as a new application, but have been previously part of a wide CTR network with previous accomplishments, would we need to include our previous accomplishments in the new application?
Well, it'd certainly be a great idea, wouldn't it? I mean, you've got that as a basis. So I'd say absolutely you want to. It's not a renewal. So in the parts that say for renewals, don't put it in there as a renewal. But you can certainly describe that as the basis for how you got where you currently are. And, maybe perhaps why you need even more. So yeah, it's a great idea.
Okay, the next one, is it appropriate in the overview to specify areas of clinical and translational interest, so long as these are not narrow, or should this be more general?
I would stick toward the more general, but again, if you're identifying potential areas that are health concerns for your population, that's okay. But you cannot say we're just gonna, obesity is a problem, so we're going to focus on diabetes. That would be a problem. You can mention what the health concerns are, and that you want to be sure the CTR addresses them, but I would avoid being too narrow.
Okay, the next one, I think Michelle partly addressed this as well before. For network projects, how are we supposed to handle the budgets? Does each CTR-N contribute 400K, or is this going to be the total budget for the project?
So if you can do it for 400K a year, go for it, right? I think that's what it comes down to. No, these don't always have to be involved, you know, CTR to CTR collaborations. They can be collaborations within the network itself, which is a little easier to manage. But it's up to you how you want to do that. It doesn't have to be every single CTR. It can be a subset. Form collaborations and projects where it makes sense. And if you haven't been part of the CTR IDEA CTR community, then you may not be aware of just how what a close-knit group it is and how well they work together. So there's lots of conversations that go on, lots of communication. And so it will be pretty easy to develop those ideas and find out who's interested in participating if you plan to lead it. But again, you can all three, say 3 CTRs could come together and put in, you know, and provide one larger clinical research project with multiple sites, if that's how they want to do it. We set, you know, a maximum budget on that just to be sure that it didn't get unmanageable and no CTR ended up, you know, getting their budget sunk for the sake of other CTRs. But that's a negotiation you'll have to work on.
Okay, next one. So are the pilots not limited to early stage investigators? That is, established investigators can be funded?
Absolutely. Independent investigator includes early stage, mid-career, super successful people. You know, you have to consider whether or not a super successful people who is managing 2 clinical trials and has 3 R01s needs a pilot, but you never know. Maybe they're just finally someone's just venturing into clinical research and has been really successful as a perhaps as a you know, medicinal chemist and now wants to move a little further into the clinic. That would be great, right? Partner them up with a clinician and go for it.
The next question about the developmental research project budget: is there a minimum amount required and level of effort for each project leader?
You know, we didn't put in a minimum budget there, but if it's less than $50,000 a year, I don't think you can expect much. That's the minimum for the pilots. We found that in the IDEA CTR program, some CTRs were putting in very small budgets, and the outcomes for them were you know, on the order of the money in, right? So we wanted to beef that up and actually have substantial funding for pilots as well as developmental projects.
Right, they're asking about level of effort though for the investigator. So
again,
that's,
it's not specified.
Yeah,
you have to think about what that person's going to need to do the research, right? So it has to make sense, and you have to evaluate that. And we, you know, when it comes in, we'll look at it as well, because that's part of the administrative review. So.
So for a CTR-D grant, would it be acceptable to have 4 or 5 partnering institutes?
Yeah, if you can manage it and figure out a way to stretch the dollars to 4 or 5, that's fine. And it may be that you're all just kind of in the same boat and trying to work together. It may be that, you know, if you're partnering with a couple of hospitals, they're interested in this, but they're very nascent. They're not gonna, they don't have huge demands, or you have to just work together to get like the EHR data collected. So having partners for those purposes are great. Make sure you state what their roles are going to be in the application, so reviewers can look at what is being proposed versus the money and make sure it makes sense, that it's doable.
Okay, the next one, can a PI and an MPI CTR-N also serve as core director of one of the CTR-N required cores? If so, is a 1 month required core level of effort, I would assume, does the involvement count against the 3-month co-PI split time requirement?
So the answer is yes, you can do it, and Christy can answer the other question.
Oh man, can you repeat it? Sorry.
Yeah, so so if someone is a PI and an MPI CTR-N, which has a 3-month minimum split requirement, does that the 1 month minimum of serving as a core director count against those 3 months?
No, I'm sorry. I don't know that I understand the question. If a different grant has a minimum effort requirement, whatever
So
you're doing for this
yeah,
grant does
yeah,
not
the way
count for that. Those efforts are not concurrent. They should be separate efforts. So if there's a 3-month effort minimum requirement on one grant and a 1-month minimum requirement on this grant, combined, you need to devote 4 calendar months, not 3.
yeah, that's the way I understood it too. Okay, cool. Thanks, Christy.
No worries.
Let me see. Next one. This was addressed. Can we have 2 leaders for 1 core? Yes, that is possible to do that. Under CTR-N, can 1 pilot project approved apply for the next year and consecutively every year?
Well, technically it's possible. I would expect that the CTR-N leadership might have something to say about that. If all the money's going to the same single person and they've never moved a project from pilot to independent funding, I don't think that's a very good choice. But again, CTR PIs manage them, not program officers. We just make comments like that and hope you follow our advice.
Yes. Let me see. The next one. Is there an expectation that the research will be done by MD clinicians, or is research by PhD non-clinicians okay?
As long as they're an independent investigator, PhD investigators are fine. We wanted to encourage clinicians to be involved in research, which is why we allow clinician fellows, people who are not yet, in that independent space, who may be there for a year or 2 to learn something, and then they're going to go on to another institution. That's still okay with us, because we think it develops the research, the clinical research culture in a good way. So as long as it's an independent person and not a postdoc, yes, they can apply for any of those programs.
Hey, can collaborative projects be between IDEA, CTRs, and COBRIs and INBRIs?
We're talking about individuals here for these collaborative projects. Do you mean the collaborative projects? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, you mean the multi-site collaborative projects.
Probably that's what it means. Yes.
That's what I'm asking. The difference. So certainly we would expect people could be supported who are part of a COBRI could be supported by a CTR pilot or some kind of research funding, as long as the there was no duplication of simultaneous funding, right, or duplication of projects funding. That's allowable. But in terms of collaborations, it's really multi-site, and collaborations mean different institutions, not necessarily different IDEA programs. So we're not looking for like some of the teen science projects that we most recently had in the IDEA program. That's not what this is about. This is about pulling together clinical research across different institutions, organizations, and sites, not different award mechanisms.
Okay, next one. If submitting a renewal CTR-N is an RPPR due that year.
Your good news is you get a break, right? When you have a renewal, you don't have to submit your RPPR for a while anyway. Then you have to catch up later on.
Does the AC have to submit a separate application component, such as a research strategy as a core, or only the overall component of the application? So I'm assuming AC is administrative core here.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that is. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So when you look at the instructions about how you're supposed to write this, almost each core has its own like individual research strategy section, right? So that's important to keep in mind, that you do get that. You get 12 pages for the overall component, the overall plan, and then you get another 12 pages for the administrative core. So we do expect there to be discussion in there. Of course, the research strategy section for the administrative core is a little bit more nuts and bolts, and it doesn't include, again, research per se, but it's about the plans. So the research plan there is about the plans for administering it, managing, coordinating, integrating across all the structures. So the NOFO has, I think, pretty clear instructions, and it does have research strategy for the administrative core listed, and as it does for all of the other cores too. So.
Okay, let's see the next one. The NOFO mentions that the PDPI of the CTR-N is expected to lead the HR core. These slides showed that the lead just needs to be a clinical researcher. Can you clarify?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it was one of the things that trip you up when you try to talk about CTR-D and CTR-N on the same slide. So thanks for asking about that. You know, by definition, the leader of a CTR-N award is expected to be a clinical researcher, right? So that means that they are, when they lead the HR core, they are the clinical researcher. But in the CTR-D, we recognize that you may need to bring in someone else, as I think it might have been Cheryl Jorsic who asked the question about what do you do if your institution doesn't have that, both aspects of leadership and program management, as well as clinical experience in the same person. For CTR-Ds, that's where you could split it out. But for CTR-Ns, we expect that person to be one and the same. So yeah, we do expect the PDPI to lead it.
The next one, when does a CTR-D applicant need to separate from the partnership of a current CTR?
Oh yeah, really important. You need to do that at the time of submission. So you can't hedge your bets and try to stay part of a CTR-N or a IDEA CTR and then hope you get the CTR-D award and then split. So you've got to include a letter to the lead institution of the IDEA CTR that you're part of that says effective this date, which is has to be the date of submission or before it. We are no longer going to participate as a partnership. We're relinquishing our partnership because we want to move forward with the CTR-D. And you should include that under the letters of support in the overall plan, so everyone's clear that partners are eligible.
Okay, the next one, can you have more than 2 co-directors per core for the CTR-D?
Yep.
Yes, you can. And that's the last question that I have right now, although Sarah did want to make a comment about naming cores and whatnot. So
please do.
So you want to unmute and bring it up?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Fred. The thing is, in the component summary, please put the name of the core instead of putting the name of the title, because the reviewers find it very difficult, because core 1, core 2, core 3, the required course when you name it. So please put the name of the core. And the second one is in the optional core, I think in the NOFO says minimum is 0, maximum is not applicable. So please see that they are not, you're not repeating, because it has to be justified, right? Yeah, according to this. Another one more suggestion is letters of support. Please don't repeat the same in all components, because it becomes long. The reviewers find it very frustrating. So please follow what Michelle told you. That will be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. We don't have any more questions in the chat.
Okay, going once. Twice. No, you can always email us separately. Email me if you have additional questions. I'll be happy to field them to the right person if I don't know the answer. So feel free to do that.
There is one that just came up. Please clarify what CTR opportunities, if any, are available to institutions in a state where another institution holds a CTSA award.
So that would be the CTR-D, right? So if another institution in your state holds a CTSA award, you should apply for a CTR-D. To do that, you should probably have a decent clinical and translational research program going already, because the state doesn't itself already has a lot going on if they have a CTSA. That doesn't mean that your institution can't benefit. So you have to make the case of why you need it, that you have some resources, you have a good amount of clinical and translational research going on, but you need more. And that would be appropriate for a CTR-D. And in fact, that's one of the groups that this mechanism is meant to help support, are other institutions that are doing clinical and translational research, but are not a partner of a current CTSA, but they can't even propose a network because there is a CTSA that exists in the state. So we're hoping to help support those kinds of institutions.
Okay, we have one more that came in. If a partner is currently in a CTR, are these institutions are these institutions still fulfilling their obligations until July 1 of 24 or until November 8th when they choose to separate?
So the date of separation has to be at the time of the submission. Ongoing activities, obviously, that have already been awarded through an IDEA CTR, say someone has a pilot award at your institution through a bigger IDEA CTR, that we would obviously want to see continue. We don't want to dismantle any of those things, but you have to change your partnership arrangement before you can submit. And remember that IDEA CTRs are not so rigid that they cannot include affiliates and people who are more tangentially involved than perhaps a pilot, than perhaps a partner. But it's up to the IDEA CTR PI to then figure out what works best for them. And so if there's going to be major changes in their network composition, it's well within their rights to then start to refocus their funding on where they're going next, so that they can also build up and increase their chances of success. So I know this is a little dicey, and it's dicey for everybody, right? You've been working in a network and you have established relationships, and there's risk involved in that. I get that. But ultimately, I think all of the IDEA states will be best served if we switch to this model. And I know it's painful to be caught in that transition, but it's the best we can do.
Okay, there's nothing else popping on the screen right now.
Again, feel free to email me if you have any questions. I'll be happy to respond. And thanks again for your attention. Thanks to my colleagues for answering questions and providing clarification. And thanks to our team for helping to run this webinar. Appreciate it all. Bye-bye.